Hello, I think I'm on, so hopefully you can see me and you can hear me. I'm feeling a little bit out of my comfort zone in this place because normally, if I'm doing a live, I'd be somewhere much more covered in green trees than this. Here I am trying to suck the best of my husband's Wi Fi inside his study, so hence all the academic stuff behind me, which is very much not me. So I'm Rachel Summers. And in my day job, I'm a forest school practitioner. In fact, when I finish here, I'm going to shove on my walking boots and my coat. I'm going to cycle my big bike off with my equipment. And I'm going to go and run a session with a bunch of toddlers. We're going to be making log dogs today, sawing chunks of logs and putting eyes on the front and then taking them for walks around the forest with string. So that's what I do for a living, making mud pies and getting paid for it. So that's quite exciting. Um, and yeah, like Steve said, so I've been involved in Forest Church for a number of years now. Not exactly sure when I started, but I went along to Greenbelt and back when it was in Cheltenham, so that dates it a little bit if you know Greenbelt and the places it's been. And I found the Forest Church stuff that was happening in there, and I thought, wow, this is really great because I find that the outdoors, the outside, being in nature, is where I connect really strongly with God, where I find it really easy to worship. And I thought that's exciting. Other people are doing the same kind of thing that I would be wanting to do. And when I came home, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if there's anywhere locally that it's happening. And there wasn't. And so I started doing it myself. So I suppose I kind of fell into it through necessity. But it's been really lovely. It's been interesting and exciting to kind of see which different people get involved in it. It's quite a easy way in for people who aren't necessarily involved in church as much, maybe for people who'd like their children to experience a bit of what a faith community looks like. Sometimes it feels more comfortable to be doing it outside rather than inside a church building. So I suppose that's kind of my background with Forest Church. And so I suppose my part of this two-parter talk is a little bit talking about what it might look like if messy church people were kind of wanting to riff on a kind of Forest Church theme. So I suppose there's four things that I'd like to say to start off with. And they're all about listening and noticing. So I think when you are worshipping outside and creating opportunities for people to engage with creation and God's creation outside, there's four things to listen to. Listen to the place, notice where you are in the country and where you are in the world. I've noticed on Steve's comments there's lots of people from Australia watching as well, and obviously not only is kind of the plant life different, the animal life different, the seasonality is really different. So notice the place that you are, because it's important where we're grounded. Kind of get your toes dug inside the earth to have a sense of where you are. Listen to the time of day that you're meeting, because there's all kinds of things you can unpack about dawn and about sunset and about high noon. And actually, sometimes it's useful to play around with times. Listen to the weather. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. If you're in the UK, then we had quite an exciting weekend for weather last weekend, didn't we? And listen to the season as well. That actually, like I was saying, that seasonality is really important. As Steve said, lots of Forest Church stuff is quite heavily influenced by seasons. And actually, when you look at the history of Christianity in the West, at least in Western Europe, it's very much follows that seasonal pattern. They're kind of hooking Christmas or Halloween or Easter onto festivals that were happening already, and those festivals were happening because of the seasons. So actually it gives you another lens to see it all through. There's a really great Margaret Macmillan quote, who was an educationalist nearly 100 years ago, 1925, she wrote this: "The best classroom and the richest cupboard is roofed only by the sky." And I find that quite an exciting quote for me, because if you were to look at my cupboards, they're quite chaotic. You open them and stuff comes tumbling out. And quite often the things that I'm thinking that I want for an activity maybe have run out, or they've gone a bit hard and crusty, or the bottom of the pot is a lot more empty than I thought it might be. And something that's exciting about being outside is actually you can't really run out. There's stuff everywhere. When I'm working with children, for example, like maybe if we're doing an activity with sticks and you send them off to go and find a stick, often they'll stand in the middle of the woods and go, but I can't find a stick, because actually there's sticks everywhere. And I had a group of children who were wanting to collect cow parsley once, and I sent them off to go and they were collecting cow parsley, and they said, but they've got more than me, so we'll go and get more because there's just so much of it. But God didn't create us to plunder the world, and I think sometimes there's a bit of a balance for us to manage there, but to enjoy it, to rest in it, to allow the world to be itself. And I think that's important, because I think sometimes as humans we can be very much wanting to kind of create the world in our image, rather than remembering that God's already created it, and that actually through that creation that's got something to teach us about who God is. So allow the world to be itself, take what we need out of plenty. So I say to the children quite often, if they're wanting to collect stuff, I say, if there's so much of it that there's too much to count, then that's fine, you can go and get some. If you can count it, then leave it to grow, leave it to stay. So I think that's quite interesting. Yeah, Sandy, I've just seen saying about Christian festivals happening in the opposite season. That's really interesting. There's actually a Forest Church Australia group which are trying to work out kind of how you look at the festivals happening the other way, and what that actually has also got to show you about God's love and God's goodness. That's quite interesting. I've seen kind of things that they've been writing at Easter time and Christmas. So it is interesting. So if you are interested in that, there is a Forest Church Australia group which is trying to kind of get their heads around how seasonality works when it's flipped the other direction. So that's quite interesting. And I think sometimes it does feel a bit like a bit of a back to front way of doing things, because often in churches we so often start with the written scriptures, and we kind of think, well, here's our Bible story that we'd really like to kind of talk about this Bible story. How can we explain that to the families who we're having coming to our session? And with Forest Church, it's kind of a bit back the other way. Well, if we're kind of looking at the book of creation, if you like, if we believe that God created the world, God created this world that we live in, if we believe that actually, as the Bible tells us, we can know about God through the world that he gave us, then maybe we need to take that seriously and actually start doing some listening. So listening hard to what God's going to speak to us through this creation that we get to be in. So it would be perfectly possible to begin with what we want to share with people, and then rummage through those rich cupboards, as Margaret Macmillan says, and find the stuff we need and say, here we are, we'll kind of teach you about this through using the sticks or the stones or the seeds or whatever, and that would be fine as well. My day job obviously is Forest School, and Forest School kind of has this relationship with outdoor education. They're both similar, so they're both children learning and playing outside. They're both useful, they're both really valid, and there's a time for both, but you get different things from them. And I think that this is kind of what I'm trying to pull out, the difference, kind of what Forest Church maybe has got to give to a conversation. So with Forest School, it feels very much like learning, but with the lid taken off, because there aren't any expectations, particularly about a result, which means that sometimes amazing things can happen. It's all about process and kind of what people are doing, what people are exploring, rather than what they are creating at the end. And then what was I going to say? Yeah. So at its best, Forest Church can offer this kind of open roofed space to explore faith and to worship. And maybe people will find themselves going down a path that actually hasn't been explored, or maybe that you hadn't particularly planned for them to be explored. Often when I'm doing a Forest Church session, I'll kind of be riffing on a theme, and kind of I'll say, well, there might be this thing that you might fancy doing, there might be this thing you might fancy doing, maybe there's something else. And quite often I'll find that the something else is really interesting, and it's got something really valuable to teach all of us. And that's really lovely with an all age setting as well, isn't it? Because actually quite often we can give the impression that it's the adults who've got all the knowledge, and we've got kind of the understanding of faith to pass on. But actually, sometimes if you make it a bit more loose, a bit more open-ended, then sometimes I find that actually the children can say, this is, well, I kind of took this theme, I took this understanding, here we are in these woods at this time, and this is what I'm feeling God is telling us all. And you can, oh, wow, that's amazing, I hadn't thought of that. And then they're feeding you and you're feeding them, and it's kind of helps build a community, which is really exciting. So some ideas before I cycle off on my bike. So, for example, I was saying in the UK we had a really stormy weekend last weekend. Storm Alex, my husband, is called Alex. He wasn't very stormy, but we did have wind and rain. And I know I had a couple of people who I knew who were planning either their first or their second outdoor church, because at the moment it's easier risk assessment wise to be outside, so people kind of are embracing the idea, which is exciting. And I've had a few people who contacted me before saying, should we cancel, what do we do, because it's raining, and is it a bad weekend to be doing an outdoor activity? But I think that what can we, if we're thinking about that listening the place, time of day, weather, season, how can we listen to what the rain has to teach us? How can we listen to how God is teaching us through the rain about himself? So there's lots of things. For example, when there's rain, there's lots of mud. So we've got, that immediately makes you kind of, I was thinking about Psalm 40. He lifted me out of the ditch and pulled me from the deep mud. So lots of ideas about kind of sliding around in the mud, how it's hard to kind of take a steady step, and how sometimes we need rescuing from that. Mud as creativity, kind of, if you dig up mud, if you're in a clay space, you can make things out of it rather than buy clay in. You can dig it from the ground. There's a kind of a sense of connection to place as well. Making different animals, different kind of creatures that have never been made before, thinking about that story of creation and God's creative power. People, making humans, making faces on trees, lots of things that you can think of there. Mud as something that's malleable, thinking about God as a potter and remaking us and remoulding us. Maybe doing stuff about shelters, because it's very motivational when it's raining, isn't it? If you have a couple of tarps and some ropes in your bag and you say, we want to make a shelter, if you try it on a nice day, then everyone's like, yeah, we'll make a shelter, that'll be fine, we'll sit in it and read a bit. But if it's actually pouring down, then you've got a lot more motivation to bother. So making a shelter and talking inside the shelter about how God is our shelter from the storm makes it really real for us, doesn't it? Maybe listening to the sound that the rain makes as it falls on different objects. If it falls on the leaves, it makes different sounds from how it falls if it's falling on like your tarp, or if it's falling on in like a metal biscuit tin. Kind of that idea of all creation giving praise, all that song of creation in so many ways, apart from just our voices. Maybe use containers to collect the rain from the tarps. Think about how it feels. How does it sound when it splashes? Think about kind of this kind of overabundance of it. It just keeps on coming and keeps on coming. And think about maybe the water cycle, and the water cycle is kind of a picture of God's blessings. I mean, it even is in Isaiah 55. You've got, as the rain comes down from heaven and doesn't return without watering the earth, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty. And what better way to make kind of see things come to life, but to see them actually in real life. It kind of makes it so much more memorable when you can remember the coldness on your fingers of the rain kind of splashing down above you. Maybe do looking for creatures that love the damp, snails and slugs and worms, and enjoy their slimy beauty, enjoy watching them, learn how to love them. Some of my favourite sessions I've ever done are things with slugs in them, because you get the slug at the beginning and everyone's kind of a bit squealy and going, ew, look at that disgusting slug, and kind of over time getting to actually notice what's special about it, notice what's beautiful about it, kind of see how it kind of glistens in the dampness, notice a little hole in its side as it's taking a breath, see how it moves. If you notice, sometimes you can spot tiny little creatures that live on slugs, so slug mites, they live inside the slug's lungs. I'm going to start going on about it now. Be quiet, Rachel, stop telling people inconsequential facts. But all these interesting things to do with these tiny creatures, that kind of idea about God being involved in little tiny details, I think that's a really useful thing as well, isn't it? That kind of idea of noticing how God has bothered not just with the hairs in our heads, but all the tininess and beauty in slugs and in snails and in worms and things. So that's my kind of how maybe I would approach a rainy day Forest Church. Possibly some of you are planning about oh, a long way from loving slugs. Well, you can work on it, Lucy. Once you've learned to love a slug, you can learn to love anything, can't you? I wondered if it might be useful to talk about some festivals coming up as well. I'm not going to talk for much longer because I know I need to cycle off, but Halloween, for example, is quite a nice festival to explore outside. It's quite a useful way of kind of getting back to why it's celebrated when it is, and to enjoy kind of the meaning of Halloween and why Halloween comes when it does. So like Steve was saying back when he was talking earlier, celebrations are often hooked onto older celebrations linked in with the seasons. And in the Northern Hemisphere, we've got Halloween as this kind of time of encroaching darkness when the plants are starting to die out. We've got these leaves falling off the trees and leaf litter. And it's unsurprising that the early Christian church here used that to kind of help people explore the idea of All Saints. That's All Saints Festival as Halloween, isn't it? All Hallows Eve. So the idea of remembering people who've died and remembering our own mortality, both of those themes come through in that. So I think lots of things outside to ponder, like autumn leaves. You might find a leaf skeleton, like a leaf that's fallen down and it's rotted over the past year, and so it's turned into compost to make new stuff grow. And I think that's quite an interesting thing to think about theologically with people. Think about, you can spot the veins in that leaf and how they carried the food and the water to help the tree grow when it was alive, but that's all that's left, and that one day our bodies will decay, but the goodness that we've helped to grow in our lives is going to continue. So that's quite an interesting thing to kind of be thinking about. Maybe collect a variety of different autumn leaves and enjoy how they're different, enjoy the colours, enjoy the shapes, see if you can describe one so other people can guess which one it is, because God made us all different, we're all special, and we can remember those who are special to us who've died, just like these leaves here. Or maybe you might use some leaves to make a stained glass window pattern. I've done that on the floor, so if you clear the kind of leaf litter out of the way, so you've got earth, you can make amazing leaf pictures on the floor, kind of big bursts of light, if you like. And that's a really beautiful symbol for Halloween, isn't it? That light in the darkness. And you can even do them with kind of those bright yellow leaves. You can even do them at dusk on the dirt, and they do kind of almost glow, which is really lovely. And pumpkins, which hold a really important part in kind of communal imagination at the moment, that kind of time of year, so it'd be a shame to miss them out. But if you think about a pumpkin and how it kind of grows and swells over the summer, soaking up all that sunshine, soaking up all that rain to make it big and round and juicy. And then as we scrape it out and put the candle inside, that enables it to be able to shine. And that's another really nice thing, as you're doing it, you can be talking with your families about kind of how it's our kind of growing in God's love and growing in trust and growing as people of faith that makes us be able to shine out. And so there's lots of stuff to do with pumpkins, maybe scooping out all the slimy bits, thinking about the slimy bits we hide inside our lives, throwing them away, and then sharing kind of symbols of hope and faith. I think I'm going to have to go in a minute because otherwise I'm going to have a whole nursery class waiting in the woods, wondering where I am. But yes, there's some ideas for you to be getting on with, and it's been really nice to hook up with you all. And I will be watching with interest to see what outside things are happening. And Lucy, I'm going to be seeing. I'm waiting for a photo of Lucy stroking her pet slug. Thanks. Bye.